Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 383, or episode 17 in the Do Not Be Hasty Reckoning. I'm calling this one Sméagol and Déagol. In this episode, we continue through Lord of the Rings, Book 1, Chapter 2, The Shadow of the Past. Greta, have you ever had someone tell you that it sounds like you have a case of the Mondays?
I think you have.
I probably have.
I think you have.
But you knew it in reference to the movie, so that I'm referencing. I probably just told you that, actually, because it sounds like you have a case of the Mondays.
Yeah.
Because you're having a bad Monday.
Right. Yes. I think I've also, said it to myself, too.
I'm having a case of the Mondays.
I'm having a case of the Mondays. It's expected and normal.
Yeah, well, it is annoying when someone says that to you, but especially with, like she does it in the movie, like, sounds like someone's having a case of the Mondays. But it actually kind of works, right? Yeah, because, there's a reason, it's a saying. So, anyway.
Yeah, Mondays. Poor Mondays. They get such a bad rap. And that song. Okay, can we just go on a little rabbit trail?
I don't like Mondays?
Yeah. And that's literally, apparently, so that song is about, a school shooting, right? Yeah. That happened, in the 80s?
Yeah, that's right.
And when they questioned the girl about why she did it, she said, because I don't like Mondays.
Yeah.
I mean, whoa. Talk about giving Monday a bad rap.
Seriously. Yeah, the Boomtown Rats.
Yeah, the Boomtown Rats.
Yeah. I was doing a radio interview in Atlanta with Johnny Fingers, and there was a telex machine beside me. I read it as it came out. Not liking Mondays is a reason for doing something is a bit strange. Doing somebody in is a bit strange. I was thinking about it on the way back to the hotel, and I just said silicon chip inside her head and switched to overload. Anyway, yeah. So it's about shooting spree of 16-year-old Brenda Ann Spencer, who fired at children in a school playground at Grover Cleveland Elementary School in San Diego, California on 29 January 1979.
Wow.
Yep. Crazy. All right.
Absolutely crazy. But yes, Mondays are just probably everybody's least favorite day of the week.
Mm-hmm.
Unless it's some people, Monday is part of your weekend, depending on your job. So
yeah,
it really just depends on your position in life.
I'm sure someone out there would stand up for Mondays. Gosh darn it.
Yeah.
Darn Garshnart.
Actually, yes. If I don't have to work on a Monday, I actually don't mind Mondays. Yeah. It just really has to do with where you are, what you're doing.
Well, you know what I do mind?
What do you mind?
Not giving a double up Air 5 to our amazing fellowship yet.
Hopefully our fellowship minds that as well.
Hopefully they mind it.
Yeah, because that means they like it. If they mind that we haven't done it yet, then that means that they like that we do it. Right?
I think so. Let's just do it. I didn't quite understand the logic, but that's all right. Stick 'em up, fellowship. 3, 2, 1. Whoopsh. Very nice.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, John R., KG, SaberSystems, and Jeremy D. Also, a shout out to those celebrating their fellowship anniversary in July of 2024. Carolyn S., Spencer M., Seb M., Matthew W., Werty, David B., Chris L. Thank you all so much for sticking with us over the years.
Yeah.
Appreciate you. All right. In this episode of Do Not Be Hasty, we continue through The Shadow of the Past as Gandalf recounts the tragic story of Sméagol and Déagol and the role it played in bringing the ring to Frodo. This section begins with the words, long after, but still very long ago, there lived by the banks of the great river, and ends with, could learn nothing of it. We're still in Third Age 3018, as we shall be for a while. But again, we're recounting events. Mostly in this chapter, most of this chapter is spent recounting events that took place many years ago. We'll get to when exactly that was in just a moment. We pick up in Media Ray from the last section, continuing from Gandalf's history of the ring, where it rested for many years beneath the waters of the great river Anduin. And what does in Media Ray mean again, Greta?
It means in the middle of.
Yes.
Like in the middle of the story.
That's right.
Not at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right on.
Thanks.
All right. So, long ago, Wilderland stores, all this stuff. All right. So, how long ago? This is in reference to long ago, but still long after. The long after part is in reference to the ring, right? So the ring is lost really at the beginning of the Third Age. So 3,000 years before the time in which Frodo and Gandalf are having this conversation. then the long after is in reference to this story we're about to hear from Gandalf, right? The long after is Third Age 2463. That comes from Appendix B, the Tale of Years, where we learn that these events that we're about to hear about took place in that year. So that's 555 years before the present year, Third Age 3018. So what does that mean? Well, that means that Gollum, right, is well over 500 years old. All right, in the story of the Lord, in the Lord of the Rings. Okay. And then one thing that I want to reference, though, with respect to this location and this time. So Wilderland, let's talk about where Wilderland is real quick, and I'll come back to this time again. Wilderland is otherwise known as Rovanien, and it's this area really around the Great River, right? So this is the Anduin. This is the map from The Hobbit, so it's a little further north in the view of what we're looking at, kind of centralized on a further north view. If we look at the map of Middle-earth and Lord of the Rings, clear this up. So here's Rovanien, right? So really we're talking about Wilderland. We're talking about all of this region, right? Kind of encompasses Mirkwood as well. The Gladden Fields, where these particular events happen, is right here. All right, and then I want to bring your attention to this right here, which is Dol Guldur, which is really Sauron's northern tower, right? His kind of northern stronghold, north of Mordor. Okay, so that's that.
Now, I'm sorry, we're pointing this out because this is where Sméagol and Déagol are from. That's right.
So Sméagol and Déagol live in this area, right, of the Gladden Fields. Okay, so this is why we're pointing all of this out.
This is also where Isildur lost the ring, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So in the year 2463 is when this is taking place. Right before that, in the Tale of Years, in the year 2460, it says Sauron returns with power to Dol Guldur after a 397-year absence called the Watchful Peace. So here's my question. Does the ring sense that Sauron is nearby, and so it's trying to make a move of some kind, right? It's trying to make a move to get back to his, to get back into his keeping?
I think the answer is, of course.
Yeah, I mean, there's no indication, like, directly from Tolkien that's the case, but it's interesting that Sauron returns to an area where that has a relatively close proximity, much closer than Mordor, to where the ring actually is. So the question kind of is all of what we're about to discuss a product of Sauron coming back and starting to exert influence again in this region?
Yeah.
And the ring sensing his presence.
I feel like it has to be.
We learned that these people that live in this area are of Hobbit kind, so they're called Stores. I'm going to do a couple of standalone episodes on the foreword and the prologue. In the prologue, it goes into like the different predecessors of the hobbits. Okay. One of which is the Stores. So we're going to learn a lot more about the Stores. But the Stores, it's kind of an interesting little history lesson. It seems like most hobbits had kind of come from this region, many like kind of almost like 2,000 years ago. And then a lot of them had migrated over the Misty Mountains to what is and eventually settled in the Shire a long time ago. But then a group of Stores came back to this region sometime after that, a few hundred years before when these events take place.
It's interesting to me that that they're predecessors or ancestors to the hobbits, right? Mm-hmm. But they live very far from the Shire.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is they basically. So if we go back to this map here, this is where they live now. So at some point, the predecessors of the hobbits kind of like migrated over, and they settled in this area for a while, and then eventually came to the Shire, right? And then but also at some point a group of stores, one of these 3 groups of hobbits, came back and resettled in the area of Wilderland.
Gotcha.
We'll get, again, I'm going to get a lot more into that on those special episodes I do on the prologue. We'll go into a lot more detail on how that all worked. But, interesting notion of like kind of the migration patterns. Here's what's really interesting about the stores. They like to swim, apparently. Who doesn't like to swim? Hobbits. Weird, right? Hobbits don't like the water. So why do stores, who apparently are also hobbits, like to swim?
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but it says right here they often swam in the river and they made little boats of reeds. They loved it. They loved the river, often swam in it, made little boats of reeds. Does not sound like any of the hobbits we've met so far. So,
sounds more like the elves.
Yeah. It is interesting to note that, of course, Frodo's parents died in that boating accident, so they like to go out on the water, but most other hobbits don't. I don't know. Maybe there's just some, like, maybe in general hobbits view it with suspicion, but some hobbits like the water. I don't know. Anyway, I just found it an interesting note because, like, it seems like so many of the hobbits view water, bodies of water with suspicion.
Yep. Yeah.
This was these stores were part of a family of or among them was a family of high repute, which was ruled by a grandmother, stern and wise in old lore, such as they had. Which is an interesting detail, like just kind of thrown in there, like that the family was ruled by this grandmother. Not something that you like see a lot, especially in like ancient stories where there's a strong matriarch as opposed to a strong patriarch. But in this case, that is. I don't know what to make of that other than just like that's how Tolkien told the story. All right, let's read and discuss a little bit about Sméagol and his character here. So, Greta, would you like to read?
Sure. The most inquisitive and curious-minded of that family was called Sméagol. He was interested in roots and beginnings. He dived into deep pools. He burrowed under trees and growing plants. He tunneled into green mounds. And he ceased to look up at the hilltops, or the leaves on trees, or the flowers opening in the air. His head and his eyes were downward.
Yeah, his head, I think the thing that resonates most is just his head and his eyes were downward. As I was reading through all of this, I couldn't help but think like it felt almost mythological, right? Like this story of Sméagol and Déagol has, like we know it's a historically within the universe, it's a historical tale, but it almost feels like a mythological kind of thing, right? Yeah. You have the 2 characters who have like very similar sounding names, and just the way and like the telling of it as well, like his head and his eyes were downward, right? It sounds like something you would read in the Old Testament, right?
Yeah.
So, but that, it's an interesting note, right? Because that denotes like someone, at first it doesn't sound like too awful. It's just like, okay, he likes things that are like, in the ground. Like, that's what he's interested in. That's cool, right? Nothing wrong with liking stuff that's in the ground. But then it says he ceased to look up at the hilltops or the leaves on trees or the flowers opening the air. It's almost like there's something of like not seeing the forest for the trees kind of sense of that, like or like he was less interested in like the beautiful things, the things that make you lift up your eyes, right? This sense of like this it's just a very mythological touch, like are you the type that lifts up your eyes or the type that's always like looking down in the dirt, right? There's a great Peter Gabriel song called Digging in the Dirt, which is kind of like about like it's like digging in the dirt to find the places we got hurt, right? It's like all, so it's like it reminds me of this in the sense of like you're digging in the dirt to kind of like dig up how you've been hurt before, and we see that maybe manifest as this little mythology goes on.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, and there's also kind of a notion here to like dark versus light, I feel like, because when you're burrowing or you're going under things, then you obviously are showing a preference for things that don't, things that are not of the light, right?
Yeah, for sure. The etymology of Sméagol is it comes from Old English, and it comes from an adjective meaning creeping in or penetrating, and it is very closely related to the name Smaug. Smaug, which means squeeze through a hole, is related to Sméagol. So there's this sense of like of burrowing, right? Of like kind of almost being like worm-like, right?
And also living in the dark, right? That's where dragons live, or in caves. And
that's right. Yeah. So again, interesting little note on his name there, that his name really has to do with like kind of burrowing worm-like activity. He's a kind of a wormish figure is what this all spells out for us. Then of course we have Déagol. Déagol is sharper-eyed than Sméagol, but not so quick and strong. Again, I'm not entirely sure what to make of that, but again, sentence feels very mythological. It's sharper-eyed, right?
Well, probably because Sméagol is always like looking in the dark.
Yeah.
Right? So his eyes are not accustomed to the light. Which would make him less sharp-eyed, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Déagol is the name that is based on the Old English word Déagol, which means secret or hidden. It is a translation of the original Westron name Nahald, which means secret in the northern tongues of the Vales of Anduin. How does Déagol's name reflect his part of the story? Well, I think it's because his death, his murder, is kept a secret, right? Eventually, as we find out here shortly. Yeah. And just a couple of quick notes on the description of the area they're in, the Gladden Fields. So this is kind of like a place where the Gladden River, which comes out of the Misty Mountains. Let's go back to our map. Zoom in a little bit here. Oop. So if we zoom in on this particular region, so here's the Anduin River, right? Kind of follows this path. And then we have the Gladden River. And so it converges, meets the Anduin River right there, kind of a 90-degree angle. And in this region is the Gladden Fields, which is, you've seen regions like where, you're kind of near the mouth of a big river, or just like close to a big body of water, like that. And it's a lot of times it's like very reedy. It's very marshy, reedy, interesting plants growing in that area. So we read about flowering reeds and irises growing in this particular area. I just want to take a quick glance at an iris since we're talking about it. Very pretty. There's an iris for you. And then just in case you're wondering what these are not flowering reeds, but in case you're wondering what a reed looks like, I guess this might be a flowering reed there.
Yeah, this marshes can be very pretty. I mean that looks very marshy. Yeah.
Yep, right there. Nice.
Yeah.
All right. So what happens is they're down by the river. Déagol is in a boat and he's fishing. Sméagol is out on shore and is kind of like just, worming around in the dirt, in the mud, like looking for whatever, right? Again, it makes you think, like, why is he doing that? Why isn't he in the boat fishing? With these mythological stories, it's like you have, like, every detail seems significant, right? And what happens is Déagol gets dragged under by a fish. This made me think of, like, kind of the archetypal, like, kind of big fish stories, right? So, first of all, there's Jonah, like the story of Jonah. But then there's also just the sense of, like, a big fish story, like, being a mythological story. Like, it's like, did this, how embellished is this story? Like, I caught this humongous fish, right? How embellished is this story being, like, a story that's, like, partly true, but, like, probably has been embellished a good bit. The big fish kind of story type. So that's what happens. Déagol gets dragged under by the fish, and he sees the ring, right? He sees a beautiful golden ring, and he lets go of the fish, and he swims down, gets the ring, and then comes back up. Now let's read a little bit. Let's get into the details a little bit of what it says happened here. So Déagol came up spluttering with weeds in his hair and a handful of mud, and he swam to the bank. And behold, when he washed the mud away, there in his hand lay a beautiful golden ring, and it shone and glittered in the sun, so that his heart was glad. But Sméagol had been watching him from behind a tree, and as Déagol gloated over the ring, Sméagol came softly up behind. Now, why wouldn't Sméagol have been like, I need to go help my friend, you know? He's like he's watching him from behind a tree. I assume he knows that Déagol has like been pulled under.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he sees him like crawling back up to the river. You know, he's like not out near the river, like trying to help him. He sees him crawling back up to the river bank, and he doesn't bother to like go try to help him. You know, he's just watching him from behind a tree.
Yeah, I found that odd.
Yeah.
I did find that odd. I don't know why.
I think it's just painting a picture that even going into this, that there's some little factors about Sméagol that like make it less surprising when we consider what's going to happen to him, right? That he doesn't seem to be like, the picture that's being painted of him in mythological terms is that he's a very like sort of sneaky, you know, kind of sus figure.
Definitely
That's
sus.
what the kids are saying these days,
Yeah.
right? Sus, you know.
Oh, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it's just giving us glimpses into his character.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. Yeah, it is weird. I remember reading that being like, why was he just watching it? And why from behind a tree?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, there is like one thing where you're like, when something surprising like that happens, there is like an element of shock, right?
Yep.
Where you're just kind of standing there for a minute like, oh my gosh, like, whoa, what do we do, right? But like at some point, that shock wears off and you take action.
Yeah, you're like running up to the riverbank being like, Déagol, where are you?
Right.
You know, even if you're too scared to swim or something like that, you're like looking for him, like seeing if you can help him, right?
Right, exactly.
And then as soon as you see him, you like run up to him, you're like, oh my gosh, are you okay, right?
Right. But here it clearly says he's watching from behind a tree.
Yeah.
Which automatically makes it even more like,
right.
Okay, that's weird. You know, like he's clearly up to no good.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's just weird that it's almost like he sensed that Déagol was, I don't know, it's weird.
Was bringing something out of the water with him.
Yeah, because like, why would he be behind a tree? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, it's one thing, like, you know, maybe he is just a complete coward and couldn't muster up the courage to go help his friend. But why are you watching him from behind a tree? Mm-hmm. Like, that clearly shows that you're planning something. So do you think the ring was already was kind of working on Sméagol? I don't know.
I mean, I think it was working on both of them.
Yeah.
You know, I think it was operating on both of them. And you know, I think we see that in the next passage here, right? So first of all, we see that Déagol is like, it says he gloated over the ring, which gloated is not a good verb. So it's not saying that Déagol is like, I don't think we get the picture that Déagol is some kind of like angel either. Like,
that's true.
Then maybe
he's
quickly realized like, oh, that's his precious. It was Déagol's precious before it was Sméagol's precious, right? And so Sméagol, of course, sees him with the ring and says, give me that, right? And Déagol's like, why? Because it's my birthday, I want it. And Déagol's response isn't like, okay, well, I found it. You know, his response is, I don't care, right? Kind of a jerk response.
Yeah.
Even though Sméagol, again, like, he has no right to ask for it, like, to take it. Déagol's response is kind of jerky, right?
Yeah.
It's very defensive. I've given you a present already, more than I could afford, right? I found this and I'm going to keep it, right? There's no sense of like, okay, just calm down.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, it's very defensive right off the bat from Déagol.
Yeah. Yeah.
But unfortunately, Sméagol is, as we learned earlier, is bigger and stronger than Déagol, and so he overpowers him and strangles Déagol. And just like, this is done so well in Return of the King. Like this whole
I was gonna say the same thing.
whole scenario,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Peter Jackson nailed it. I just remember being blown away by how good it was the first time I saw it. Like, you know, this was like you know, with Fellowship of the Ring, I hadn't really, I think I'd read the books. I don't think I'd read the books yet when I first saw Fellowship of the Ring in theaters in 2001. But by the time Return of the King came out, I think I read them twice. And I hadn't thought to myself like, oh, I'd really like to see this scene. I figured we'd pass this scene by a long time ago because you're in the third movie at that point, right? But I remember like you it opens and you're like, who are these two guys? And you're just like, what is this? What's going on here? And if you've read the books, you maybe started to be like, wait a minute, is this Sméagol and Déagol? And you slowly kind of like realize. At first, I think they show it, and Déagol is the one who you see first, and so you're like, wait a minute, is that? That well, okay, no, that's not Gollum, so this can't be the story. But then you realize like, oh, Sméagol's there too, right? It's just it's so well done, and it's such a great prologue to that film because of the importance of Gollum in that movie.
Yeah.
But so kudos to Peter Jackson for I think really nailing that scene pretty well.
Yeah.
Still one of my favorite moments in all of the trilogy, all of Jackson's trilogy.
No, agreed. Yeah.
All right. So let's read a little bit more about what happened with Sméagol after this. Of course, so Sméagol murders Déagol. No one ever finds out what becomes of Déagol. His body's cunningly hidden. It says he was murdered far from home, so they're not close to where they live. I guess they'd gone on a long, walked a long ways for this fishing trip. And his body was cunningly hidden. Yep. There's
another little insight into Sméagol's character.
Yep. Cunningly hidden.
Yep.
Yeah. But Sméagol returned alone, and he found that none of his family could see him when he was wearing the ring. He was very pleased with his discovery, and he concealed it, and he used it to find out secrets, and he put his knowledge to crooked and malicious uses. He became sharp-eyed and keen-eared for all that was hurtful. The ring had given him power according to his stature. It is not to be wondered at that he became very unpopular and was shunned when visible by all his relations. They kicked him and he bit their feet. He took to thieving and going about muttering to himself and gurgling in his throat. So they called him Gollum and cursed him and told him to go far away, and his grandmother, desiring peace, expelled him from the family and turned him out of her hole. I hadn't put together like Sméagol and then Gollum, right? Like that there's actually kind of a connection between the two names. I thought the Gollum thing was just purely the noise he made, but it kind of you see like because Sméagol ends with Gol and Gollum begins with Gol. I'd never made that connection before. I don't know if Tolkien intended anything by that, but it was interesting to realize that part of it.
Very interesting.
So, yeah. I just when I read this passage about what happens, the transformation that takes place in Sméagol initially, it just makes me think about like that whole thing. Like a lot of us have probably wished, like been like, oh, it'd be so cool to have like to be able to be invisible and like like be a fly on the wall and listen to like conversations that no one knows you're listening into and all this kind of stuff. You probably think about that when you're younger, and then as you get, it doesn't take you long to realize like maybe that even happens to you in a couple of cases, and you're like, maybe that's not such a good idea. Maybe I don't really want to be a part of that, and maybe you realize like, oh, that's just creepy too. Like, I wouldn't like it if somebody did that to me. But certain kinds of people, like there are people in the world like they would love to have that power, and they don't care what because they would like, I knew they were talking bad about me. It's like for me, I'm like, if people are talking bad about me, they can talk bad about me. I don't want to know, right? And honestly, like, if it's somebody that's like, I care that they were talking bad about me, they probably don't really mean it. They're just having a private conversation. And sometimes when you have private conversations with people, like, you are a little more honest about other people, right?
Yeah.
But in this case, Sméagol is able to hear all these things, and because his eyes are downward, his eyes are focused downward on the world and into the dirt and digging up the dirt, right? Everything becomes hurtful, and it just like
that's
it
interesting.
Just festers with him.
Yeah, because that's what you think about. We think the slang term, right, is like, what's the dirt on them, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what he wants. He wants the dirt on everybody, and he's gonna use it for evil.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
What's the dirt on everybody?
Mm-hmm,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. So, Sméagol kind of over time becomes falls out of favor with his family,
For good reason.
For good reason. For good
Yeah.
reason, absolutely. They begin to call him Gollum, so they give him the name Gollum, and then kind of I guess and it obviously it's like a name to kind of make fun of the sounds he makes, kind of the gurgling sound, right? He makes, and so one can kind of surmise that he adopts this name like as a well, if that's what I'm Gollum, right?
Isn't gall also like some kind of thing like very bitter?
Yeah, well, that's
Gall.
Gall.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds similar.
But I think the sounds of the words are very similar. They're definitely homophones.
Yeah.
Homophones.
Yep.
So, and there's probably some kind of relation in that as well. But so he grows increasingly bitter. He was already a bit of an odd fellow, but he is now cast out, and he wanders about in loneliness, weeping a little for the hardness of the world, journeys up the river till he comes to a stream that flowed down from the mountains, and he went that way. He caught fish in deep pools with invisible fingers and ate them raw. One day it was very hot, and as he was bending over a pool, he felt a burning on the back of his head, and a dazzling light from the water pained his wet eyes. He wondered at it, for he had almost forgotten about the sun. Then for the last time he looked up and shook his fist at her. But as he lowered his eyes, he saw far ahead the tops of the misty mountains out of which the stream came, and he thought suddenly it would be cool and shady under those mountains. The sun could not watch me there. The roots of those mountains must be roots. The roots of those mountains must be roots indeed. There must be great secrets buried there which have not been discovered since the beginning. So he journeyed by night up into the highlands, and he found a little cave out of which the dark stream ran, and he wormed his way like a maggot into the hearts of the hills and vanished out of all knowledge. Again, like Smaug, wormed his way into this dark hidden place underground. The ring went into the shadows with him, and even the Maker, with his power had begun to grow again, could learn nothing of it when his power began to grow again. So yeah, just to kind of map that out here. So if we think about where Bilbo meets Gollum, right? So here's the Gladden Fields. Here's the area in which, Sméagol lived, and then he journeys up the river after he's banished from his home. He journeys up the river, and then probably goes in somewhere in kind of this area, right? And because there's Rivendell on the other side of the Misty Mountains, and he lives there for the next 500 years. So.
Interesting. It's strange to me too. Again, that it says that the maker of the ring, obviously Sauron, knew nothing of he couldn't. He didn't know where it was once Gollum went under the mountains.
Yeah.
So maybe it has to do with a depth thing. Maybe it's not water. Maybe it's a depth thing that prevents Sauron from finding the ring.
I think as long as it is interesting that since Gollum was wearing it, that he wouldn't have had Sauron wouldn't have had some sense of it. But again, does Sauron need to where is Sauron? So a couple of things. First of all, he hasn't been in touch with the ring in a long time. Okay.
Yep.
And so is his ability to kind of tune in to the ring, has it gotten weaker over time? Second of all, remember what Gandalf said, right? Saruman, they don't think anything of hobbits. I don't even think Sauron knows hobbits exist. So if he's trying to tune into the ring, is he looking in is he trying to tune into the wrong frequencies, right?
Could be.
And or just is he simply otherwise distracted by other things? Because again, he doesn't know the ring still exists at this point, that it's been found, right? Sauron does not.
Right.
He doesn't become aware until later on. So
yeah, it's just weird to me that he's not. Because Gollum is not a hobbit.
Well, he is.
I mean, okay, he's like an ancestor to hobbits. Yeah.
He's a hobbit cousin for sure.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's just puzzling to me.
Yeah.
That Sauron is so clueless.
I mean, again, Sauron is not omniscient, omnipresent.
Right, that's true. He's not like a Luthor.
Omnipotent. Like,
yeah.
He has his own limitations, and he's been weakened by his defeat and his loss of the ring, right? He's actually been weakened successive times, right? Because he was first weakened in the fall of Numenor, when he had to forsake his like beautiful appearance, because he went down with the island, right? And then he was further weakened after his defeat at the last alliance of men and elves.
Yep.
And he's kind of almost like a spirit in the wilderness at that point, right?
Yeah.
So he is in a weakened state, and he may be gaining power again, but he's not fully back to his old level of power. Yeah. So I think again, like some might say like, oh, these are just like plot holes that Tolkien didn't address. I think that there's virtue in not trying to address every single little detail, but kind of leaving some of it open to, how might that have worked. And I think Tolkien actually does that very masterfully throughout his story. I think he actually does a really good job of like addressing major plot holes, but then he also is like, but I'm not going to like he gives a lot of detail for someone that I think ultimately says, I'm not going to give so much detail that like I paint myself into a corner here, that I can't get out of, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but with all this, Gollum, now that he's under the Misty Mountains, the ring's plan is foiled in a way. So if you assume that the ring was trying to find a victim to use to get back to Sauron, then Gollum, in a way, is the first hobbitish figure to foil the plans of the mighty, even though he does it out of very bad motives, right?
Yes.
But I do think, I think there's a truth in that Sauron overlooks the possibility that some hobbit, had gotten hold of, some halfling had gotten hold of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That totally makes sense, yeah. And when Gollum makes his way under the Misty Mountains, he's actually moving away from Dol Guldur. Is that correct?
That's true.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So he really...
And I mean, being hidden under the mountains may be even more, like, harder on the frequencies than, than being hidden under a lot of water, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. All that rock and everything. Yeah. It's really interesting to me that, kind of the last straw here, it feels like that kind of seals Gollum's fate, is the cursing of the sun, which is, you think of the sun is just like, is the symbol of life, right? Because it gives you
and light
and light, exactly. And he's become so corrupted by the ring that he can't stand the sun.
Yeah.
He actually curses it. Right?
Yeah. Again, it's another very mythological detail about the story. Like it sounds like something like an Old Testament figure would do, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
He cursed the sun as he, as he scrambled under the mountain, right?
Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, so Greta?
Yeah.
I think that's the end of this section. What did I miss?
No. Well, I think you did a good job.
Right on.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything you missed.
Well, you did a good job, too.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. All right, y'all. Well, Sméagol's story is both tragedy and horror, just as he is both murderer and, in a significant way, a victim. As we continue through Lord of the Rings, this tension between being both a perpetrator of evil and a victim of it as well will become ever more manifest in the sad story of Gollum. In the next episode, Gandalf will lead us further into the story of Gollum as we continue to understand how the shadow of the past is being brought to bear on Frodo's today. Stay tuned.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please consider supporting us in one or all of the following ways. First, join the Fellowship of the Road by visiting patreon.com/TolkienRoad. When you join the Fellowship of the Road, it helps us to keep on evering on and lands you some cool perks along the way. Learn more at patreon.com/TolkienRoad.
Second, if you're watching, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know what's on your mind in the comments below.
Finally, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or the platform of your choice. If you are a 5-star fan of the Tolkien Road, you can really help us out by heading over to iTunes or your preferred source for the show and dropping us a rating and review. When you do that, it helps get the word out about the Tolkien Road, which helps us to keep on evering on.
As always, keep the correspondence coming. We'll do our best to respond to you somehow and at some point. With Do Not Be Hasty, we'll let the mail pile up and then do a big mailbag episode at the end of each chapter. Well, we can't promise you that your mail will be read on air. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So drop those comments and send those electronic mails.
Finally, don't forget to stop by truemythspress.com for great merch like super styling and comfy Tolkien Road t-shirts, 2 Trees camper mugs, and signed copies of John's books, Tolkien's Requiem and Tolkien's Overture. Once again, that's truemythspress.com. Thank you for supporting our work with your purchase.
To close, as always, we'd like to thank our amazing fellowship. We know all of you half as well as we should like, and we've thanked less than half of you half as well as you deserve. Special thanks to the following:
John R.
Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien,
KG.
Melkor 27,
SaberSystems.
Jeremy D,
Emilio P.
Jonathan D,
Richard K.
Paul D,
Julia.
Werty,
Chris B.
Tuor 91,
Carolyn S.
Emiel K,
Brian O. II.
Jonathan R,
Matthew W.
Daniel D,
Harrison C.
Jason C,
Seb M.
Wilbo Baggins,
Ms. Anonymous.
Andrew T,
Red Hawk.
Shannon S,
Brian O. I.
Zeke F,
James L.
Chris L,
Azia V.
Ish of the Hammer,
Teresa C.
David of Pints with Jack,
And Eric B.
Finally, thanks to all for watching and or listening. Until next time, the road goes ever on.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.